Feel the cold before you hear anything else. Not the kind of cold that makes you reach for a blanket. The kind that crawls through wood and settles into your bones like it has nowhere else to be. The kind that a pregnant woman should never know. Not in her 8th month. Not with a child growing inside her. Not on a night when the wind comes in through the cracks in the wall and the candle is burning so low it might not make it to morning. That is where Isla Finch is tonight, book-hurled against a rotting wooden wall at the edge of the Ironvale Pack's compound, her hands wrapped around the swell of her belly, her breath rising in small white clouds that disappear into the dark. The floor beneath her is cold, unfinished earth bleeding through gaps in the boards. The smell around her is damp timber and old straw, the smell of abandonment, of a space built for storage and repurposed as a punishment. And 20 steps across the courtyard, a warm golden light spills from the tall windows of the pack house. She can hear the laughter from here. She can hear it perfectly. Some bonds are forged in blood. Some debts are carried across years. And some nights, the universe decides it has waited long enough. The candle on the floor had maybe an hour left. Isla knew this the way she had learned to know everything in that cabin. By watching, by measuring, by counting the small things, because the small things were all she had. One candle, not one thin wool blanket that smelled of old cedar, one cracked wooden wall at her back, its gaps wide enough to let in the moonlight in thin, cold needles, one wolf pup, barely 4 months old, pressed against her left knee with a warmth so fierce and stubborn it felt like an argument. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. His fur was grey and matted, and his ribs were a little too visible, and his eyes were the most loyal things she had ever seen. "Thank you, Ash," she whispered. He pressed harder against her knee. She moved her hands back to her belly. 8 months. The baby shifted beneath her palms, a slow, rolling movement that made her breath catch every single time, no matter how many nights had passed since she first felt it. There was something about that movement that could reach through all of it. Through the cold, through the quiet, through the laughter coming from the pack house windows. Through all of it. I promise I will find a way to get you. Promise I will find a way to get you somewhere warm. I promise that wherever you come into this world, it will not be in a place like this. I will not let it be. The baby moved again, slow and steady, as though answering. Ash put his nose against her wrist. She exhaled. Outside, for the laughter from the pack house rang out, bright and self-satisfied, the kind of laughter that has no awareness of anything outside itself. She recognized it. She had been listening to it for 2 years, Ragnar Doolin's voice, carrying across the cold courtyard like it owned the air it travelled through, which, inside those walls, it did. She could picture the scene without looking. She had sat inside it enough times to know every detail. Ragnar at the head of the long table, his dark hair combed back, his broad shoulders filling the chair of a man who had never once questioned whether he deserved the space he occupied. His mother, Myla, to his right, small, sharp-eyed, dressed in deep burgundy, her thin, approving smile arranged on her face like a piece of furniture. Stellan in the corner, Ragnar's younger brother, quiet as always, eyes on his plate, shoulders drawn in, saying nothing. Stellan never said anything. Nobody mentioned the woman in the cabin, but nobody asked why the pack house had a room left empty when a pregnant she-wolf was sleeping on cold ground 20 steps away. Nobody thought it strange that a child about to be born into Ironvale Pack had not been given a warm corner in which to wait for that moment. Nobody looked at the padlock on the cabin door and found it worth remarking on, or if they did, they had learned the hard way what remarking cost. Isla closed her eyes and rested her head against the wall. Her spine ached in the way it had ached for the past 3 weeks, deep, persistent, a slow, grinding complaint that no position could fully quiet. She shifted slightly, and Ash adjusted with her, his small, warm body tracking her movement without waking. She thought about Clara. She thought about Clara often in this cabin, more than anywhere else. Her grandmother's face, the cottage at the edge of the forest, the way Clara's hands looked in lamplight, rough-knuckled, and ink-stained from the silver thread she worked by feel in the dark, always moving, always making something, the way she smelled of pine sap and lavender, and old books, the sound of her voice in the kitchen early in the morning, low and steady and unhurried, filling the small rooms with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. You're stronger than you know, my girl. The right kind of strong, the kind that bends and doesn't break. She pressed her palms harder against her belly and breathed. The baby moved again. Hold on, little one, just hold on. The silence broke at 20 minutes past midnight. Isla heard the iron gates before she saw the headlights. A deep, metallic groan that carried across the frozen air with the authority of something that had not been asked permission. She lifted her head. Through the one small window in the cabin's east wall, she watched the courtyard. Headlights first, white and precise. But then the shape of the first vehicle, large and black, moving at the measured pace of something that had no reason to rush. Then the second, then the third. 3 vehicles rolling into the Iron Vale courtyard, one after another, slow and deliberate, like the opening notes of a piece of music that had not been played here before. They stopped. The engines cut. The courtyard went very still. 12 figures emerged, dark clothing, straight spines, eyes that moved like wolves cataloguing ground, sweeping the pack house, the training yard, the fences, the shadows at the edges. Military precision. Not aggressive, not threatening. Simply certain. The kind of certainty that comes not from wanting to fight, but from knowing, absolutely, that if anything required fighting, it would be handled. The last door opened. One man stepped out. Isla pressed her palm against the cold glass of the cabin window and watched. It after he stepped out, the way a commander after he stepped out, the way a commander stands when surveying a space he is responsible for, not marking what he owns, but measuring what needs tending. His eyes moved across the pack house, the courtyard, the outer wall, all of it in a single, slow sweep. Then, that on his right forearm, visible below a coat sleeve pushed casually to the elbow, a long silver scar caught the moonlight and held it for a moment. Isla's gaze stayed on that scar. She did not know why. Inside the pack house, the laughter had stopped. She could hear, faintly, Ragnar's voice shifting registers, the loud self-satisfaction replaced by something controlled and slightly too careful. She had heard that particular shift before. It was the voice he used when someone arrived who made him feel the need to perform competence rather than simply assume it. The man with the silver scar was already walking toward the pack house entrance, and every wolf in the courtyard moved subtly, repositioning, straightening, creating space around him without being asked. Isla sat back from the window. Her heart was doing something she couldn't quite name. She looked at Ash. He was awake now, sitting upright, ears forward, nose working. There's required attention. I know. She required attention. I know, she whispered to him. I feel it too. She pressed her back against the wall and wrapped both arms around her belly and tried to understand the thing she was feeling. That shift in the air she had noticed from the cabin window, the way the night had changed in the space of 3 minutes. The entrance, and let Ragnar shake his hand. He was a man from the last vehicle standing just inside the pack house entrance, and let Ragnar shake his hand. He accepted the handshake the way a king accepts tribute, without warmth, without rejection, simply receiving it. His eyes moved across the hall in one careful pass. The long table, the fire, the wolves gathered in the corners and along the walls. Too many for a quiet evening, which meant Ragnar had assembled them deliberately, performing the strength of his pack for a visitor he had known was coming. The visitor's face gave away nothing. "Alpha King Richmond," Ragnar said, his voice pitched at exactly the right volume, loud enough for every wolf in the room to hear the title, quiet enough to suggest intimacy. "We are honored by the visit. We have prepared rooms. Right, we have Kalen," the man said, cutting him off without raising his voice. "And I'm not staying. This is a review, not a visit." The hall shifted almost imperceptibly. Ragnar's smile held. "Of course. Whatever the Alpha King requires, Iron Veil is ready to provide." Kalen looked at him for a moment, just long enough to make it clear he was doing exactly that, looking, measuring, deciding, before his gaze moved past Ragnar to the room behind him. Or then he turned to the man at his right shoulder and said, quietly enough that only the nearest wolves could hear, "Walk the grounds, Orion." The man named Orion Brock nodded once and turned back toward the packhouse entrance without a word. Ragnar watched this and kept smiling, but his hands, Kalen noted, had found the edge of the table behind him. Orion Brock had been Kalen's beta for 7 years, and in those 7 years he had developed the particular skill of reading a space the way you read a face, quickly, completely, without letting the reading show. He walked the perimeter of the Iron Veil compound with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes doing the actual work. Training yard, maintained, but not recently used, which meant the equipment was for show. Stables, clean, which meant someone here valued their horses better than their people. A detail worth noting. Those storage buildings along the south wall, properly locked, properly labelled. A small garden, winter bare, but the raised beds were well built. He moved toward the east side of the compound and stopped. At the far edge of the courtyard, separated from the packhouse by a stretch of frozen ground, there was a structure that did not belong to the same compound as the rest of it. It was not a storage building. It was too small. It was not a training annex. The windows were wrong. Padlock on the outside of the door. A padlock on the outside of the door. A thin, steady line of candlelight beneath it. Orion stood for a moment and looked at the padlock. He walked back to the packhouse. He found Kalen standing at the far end of the main hall, listening to Ragnar explain the pack's expansion along the northern border. Planned acquisitions, new allies, infrastructure projects. The speech of a man who had prepared this monologue and was delivering it on time. Orion stopped at Kalen's shoulder. He said 3 words. "Someone's inside. Locked." Ragnar was mid-sentence. Kalen turned from him without a word and walked toward the back of the packhouse. Ragnar's voice stopped. The hall went quiet. Mila, from her seat at the far end of the table, watched her son's face go through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, calculation, fed then a fear he was trying hard to disguise as irritation. Stellan, in the corner, set down his cup and didn't pick it up again. The padlock took Orion 4 seconds. The door swung open on hinges that screamed with rust, and torchlight poured into the cabin like something that had been waiting outside for a long time. The woman inside flinched, shielding her eyes with one arm, her other hand locked over her belly, her voice shaking but not surrendering. "I don't have anything. Oh, please, please leave me alone." Kalen stood in the doorway. He did not move, because she had lowered her shielding arm slightly, and in the torchlight he could see her face, the hollow in her cheeks, the bruise fading on her left jaw, the cracked lip, the thin clothing entirely wrong for the temperature, the wolf pup pressed against her knee, and her eyes, silver grey, like frost spread across the surface of still water in the first hour of winter morning before anyone has walked across it. Have run. Who didn't run? Who stayed in have run. Who didn't run? who stayed in the rain and pressed her wrap against his wounds and talked to him in a low, steady voice for hours before he was conscious enough to hear it. 5 days in a forest shelter, her hands careful and certain on wounds that should have killed him. A face he could never fully see clearly in the dark. A voice he heard every time his mind went quiet, and eyes he had never forgotten for a single day in 8 years. Those eyes. His jaw tightened. He stepped into the cabin and lowered himself slowly to one knee, the alpha king of the northern packs, kneeling in the dirt of a rotting cabin floor, bringing himself level with the woman curled against the wall. She stared at him, was not with recognition, but with a wariness so deeply settled it had become the default expression of someone who had been given too many reasons to have it. A woman who had learned to brace. His voice, when it came, was the quietest thing in the room. No one here came to harm you. From the packhouse doorway, Ragnar's voice cut across the courtyard, loud with the specific outrage of a man who had realized, too late, that something he had kept hidden was no longer hidden. She is my mate. This is a private pack matter. You have no authority over. Orion stepped into his path. Said nothing. Didn't need to. Inside the cabin, Kaelin had not looked away from Isla. He asked her one question. Only one, in a voice so quiet that only the two of them could hear it. And she understood somehow that this was deliberate. That this was not a question meant for the courtyard or the packhouse or the gathered wolves. This was a question meant only for her. Do you want to stay, or do you want to leave? It is your choice. Isla stared at him. The words moved through her slowly, the way warm water moves through frozen ground, finding the cracks, spreading into them, beginning the long process of thaw. Your choice. When had anyone last said those words to her? She turned them over carefully, checking them for traps, for conditions attached to the back of them that she couldn't see yet. She found none. She looked at Ragnar being held at the packhouse door by Orion's steady presence. She looked at Ash, who was standing now, 4 paws planted, ears forward, his small body aimed at the man kneeling in front of her, with a stillness that was not aggression, but something closer to attention. She looked back at the man in front of her. His dark eyes were waiting. No urgency in them, no performance. Just waiting. But the way someone waits who already knows the answer and simply needs the other person to arrive at it in their own time. There was something in those eyes. She could not name it. She had no reason to trust it. She had no reason to trust anything or anyone inside these walls. And yet, something in those eyes was not a stranger's eyes. Something in them reached toward a memory she couldn't quite place, brushing against it and retreating before she could see it clearly. Lunged forward. Orion's hand on his lunged forward. Orion's hand on his shoulder stopped him as cleanly as a wall. Myla appeared in the packhouse doorway behind him, her voice rising sharp and high. She has no right. She belongs here. She made vows. But the words scattered into the cold air and fell without landing on anything that mattered. Stellan stood behind Myla in the doorway. He watched Isla walk. His face was still and unreadable, but his eyes followed her all the way across the courtyard, and there was something in them that looked, for the first time in longer than he could remember, very much like relief. Isla did not look back. She walked with one arm curved under her belly and her chin level and her eyes forward, her feet finding each frozen flagstone one at a time. Ash moved at her left heel, his claws ticking quietly against the ground, matching her pace exactly. The courtyard parted for her without anyone asking it to. She did not look back. Not once. And the night, that cold, still, padlocked night, began, very slowly, to change. 8 years before that night, the forest behind Clara Finch's cottage was the most beautiful and the most dangerous place that Isla knew. She had grown up on its edge. She knew where the good herbs grew, yarrow and feverfew along the northern bank, as dried lavender under the old stone wall, the small bright patches of wolf clover that appeared only for 2 weeks in early summer and had to be harvested before the deer found them. She knew which paths held their ground after rain, and which turned to mud that would swallow a boot. She knew the sounds the trees made in still air versus the sounds they made when something large was moving through them. She knew how to be in the forest without being afraid of it. But what she had never accounted for was a storm like this one. A storm that arrived 3 hours ahead of the forecast and hit the trees like a judgment. The sky dropped its contents all at once, sheeting rain, a wind that turned sideways, lightning that lit the world in brief, furious flashes that made the shadows jump. She was 19 years old, soaked through, with a basket of storm herb cuttings pressed against her chest, trying to remember the path home. The flash of lightning caught the shape at the base of the old oak. She stopped. He was face down. Big, broad across the shoulders, arms spread in the attitude of someone who had not chosen the ground. Dark hair plastered to his neck. 2 wounds visible even in the rain. One across the ribs, dark and long, the other along the right forearm, bleeding fast and spreading dark into the wet earth. Her first instinct was exactly what any sensible person's would be. Run. Get Clara, a voice stopped her. A healer who walks past 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 her voice stopped her. A healer who walks past suffering has no business calling herself one. Isla stood in the rain for 5 seconds. Then she knelt beside him. She had no way to carry him. She was half his size, and he was not conscious, and the path home was a 1/4 mile through muddy forest. She checked his breathing, shallow, ragged, but present, and pressed 2 fingers to the wound on his arm. Too much blood. She needed to slow it now, or it wouldn't matter what she did next. She set down the herb basket, pulled off her outer wrap, pressed it against the arm wound, and held it there with the focused pressure Clara had taught her. Not panicking, just working, her hands finding the shape of the task, and doing it. She looked at him. The rain was easing slightly, which gave her a little more to see. His face was turned partly toward her. Young, older than her, but not by much, maybe mid-20s. Strong jaw, dark brows, a face that even unconscious held a quality she couldn't quite name. Not hardness exactly, authority maybe, but the natural kind, the kind that comes from inside rather than from being given it. On his right wrist, beneath her pressing hands, she could feel something under the sleeve. She shifted slightly to check. Not a wound. They needed to get him out of the rain. They needed to get him out of the rain. The forest shelter was closer than the cottage, 40 steps northeast, a low stone structure built decades ago for exactly this kind of weather emergency. She could not carry him, but she could move him. It took her 20 minutes and every bit of strength she had. She dragged him, inch by careful inch, as guiding his weight across her shoulders and leaning into each step, slipping twice and catching herself and continuing. Her knees were bleeding by the time she got him to the shelter. Her hands were shaking with cold and effort. She got the door open and maneuvered him inside and collapsed onto her knees on the dry stone floor and just breathed for a minute. Then she got back to work. She tended to him for 5 nights in that shelter, but each day she slipped back to the cottage and collected what she needed: herbs from Clara's workroom, clean cloth, broths in sealed jars, and each day she told Clara she was tending to an injured animal in the forest, which was technically accurate, and which Clara accepted with the particular look of a woman who understands more than she is being told, and chooses, for reasons of her own, to let the understating stand. On the 3rd night, he opened his eyes. They were dark, deep brown, or nearly black in the shelter's dim light, and they moved to her face with the immediate, sharp focus of someone whose survival instincts come back before full consciousness does. Not aggressive. Alert. Taking in the space, the light, the fire she had managed with damp wood and patience, and then her. Where? His voice came out rough and broken from 3 days of not being used. Forest shelter, Isla said, without looking up from the wound she was rebinding on his arm. About 1/2 a mile from the Ironvale border. A pause. She could feel him putting things together. Who are you? Someone who found you bleeding in the rain. She kept her hands moving. You should drink something. She passed him the jar of broth. He took it without comment and drank. His eyes stayed on her the whole time, that steady, measuring attention, not unkind, but thorough. The eyes of someone who evaluates things as a reflex. You've been here since 3 nights. Another pause. What, why? She finally looked at him. He looked back, waiting, genuinely curious. Not the casual curiosity of small talk, but the specific curiosity of someone who had genuinely not expected the answer and genuinely wanted to understand it. Because you needed someone to be, she said. He was quiet for a long time after that. On the 4th night, the fever broke. She sat beside him in the firelight and watched colour return to his face and his breathing even out, and she felt the particular satisfaction of a job well done. the quiet pride of hands that had been used correctly. He was watching her again. "You still haven't told me your name." "You still haven't told me yours," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one, the memory of the habit before it had been used recently. "Fair. You just need to heal," she said. "Names don't matter." He looked at her. "They matter to me." She thought about that. She thought about Clara's voice. A seed planted in darkness grows toward its own light. She thought about all the reasons it was better to remain unknown to a wounded wolf you found alone in the forest, whose wounds looked like they had come from something with intent. "Then remember my face," she said, not unkindly. "That's enough." On the 5th morning, he was strong enough to stand. He moved to the shelter doorway and tested his legs with the cautious confidence of a body checking its own inventory. Then he turned back to her. He reached for his right hand, for a ring on his smallest finger, and held it out to her. "For what you did." She shook her head. "I don't need it." "Then let me. You just need to live," she said. "Don't come back here." He looked at her for a long moment, and the morning light was pale and clean, and it fell across his face, and she could see him properly for the first time. Really see him, the full weight of him, those dark eyes, steady and serious, and holding something she didn't have a name for yet. He left. She sat in the empty shelter for a while after, listening to the forest settle back into its ordinary sounds. It was only when she picked up her herb basket to go home that she realized the small silver wolf charm she had tied around his wrist to secure the makeshift bandage was gone. Still on his wrist. She had never untied it. Clara had given it to her the night before the storm. "Keep this one," she had said, stitching by firelight, not looking up. "It will find the person it belongs to eventually." Isla stood in the empty shelter and looked at her own bare wrist. Well, she thought, I suppose it has. Or she went home and told Clara she had successfully gathered the storm herbs. Clara looked at her over her embroidery, that long, steady, knowing look, and said, "You planted a seed tonight, my girl. Trust it to grow." She never asked who the man was. She never asked about the charm. And Isla, who had spent 19 years learning that her grandmother knew more than she ever said, and trusted more than she ever explained, let the silence hold. She carried the memory of those dark eyes with her for 8 years, the way you carry certain things. Not heavily, not obsessively, but present, the way a scar is present, the way the shape of a place you loved stays with you even after you've left it. She never expected to see them again. She never imagined they had been looking for her. Clara Finch died on a Tuesday in early autumn, 3 years before the night of the black vehicles. Isla had slept well that night, deeply, dreamlessly, at the heavy sleep of someone who had spent the previous day in the garden. She woke to a silence in the cottage that was different from the usual morning silence. Not the quiet of a sleeping house, but the quiet of an empty one. Clara was in her chair by the hearth. Her hands were in her lap, still holding the embroidery she had been working on the night before. Silver thread. A wolf charm only half finished, the needle still threaded. So Isla stood in the doorway of the sitting room. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a white collar and cuffs. Her hair was tied back in a bun. She was holding a book in her hand. She was looking at the door. She was wearing a black dress with a... Isla stood in the doorway of the sitting room for a long time. She did not move. She did not call out. She stood and looked at the woman who had raised her from the age of 7, who had been the whole architecture of her world, who had known things about Isla that Isla did not yet know about herself, and she tried to understand that the quiet in this room was permanent. She held her grandmother's cold hand until the light changed. The funeral was small. 3 neighbors. A handful of words that meant well and landed short. Then everyone went home, because life does not pause while you learn how to carry a new weight. And Isla was left alone in a cottage that had always felt exactly the right size, and now felt as wide and empty as the winter sky. She was 24 years old. She had no pack, but no family. No one in the territory who had known Clara well enough to feel what her absence meant. She had her grandmother's herb knowledge, and her grandmother's healing hands, and her grandmother's embroidery needles, and an unfinished wolf charm with a silver thread going nowhere. She had, in other words, everything necessary to survive, and nothing necessary to stop the ache. Ragnar Dulin arrived 6 months after the funeral. He came to the cottage door on a grey morning with a bundle of winter flowers that were slightly past their best. Not enough to be a poor gift, just enough to be a real one rather than a performance. Isla noticed this. At the time, she took it as a sign of genuineness. Later, she would understand it as the first calculation. He was tall, dark-haired, well-built in the way of a wolf who worked hard and knew it. Or his voice was warm and easy, and he spoke about her grandmother with a familiarity that surprised her. He had apparently known of Clara, respected her healing work, heard her spoken of highly among the older pack wolves. He came back 4 days later, and then again. No she-wolf should be without protection, he told her on the 3rd visit, sitting across her kitchen table with his broad hands wrapped around a cup of tea, his eyes full of a concern she had not yet learned to read correctly. Especially not out here, alone. The forest border isn't safe at this time of year. She thought about safety. She thought about Clara's voice, growing quieter each passing week, that guiding presence receding into the back rooms of her memory. She thought about winter coming, and firewood she would need to gather alone, and repairs the cottage roof needed, that she could not make alone. She thought about how much she missed being known by someone. He was patient. He was warm. He was consistent. But he didn't press. And when he suggested, carefully, gently, that perhaps Ironvale Pack could offer her the community she deserved, a home among wolves who would value her healing gifts, she felt the offer reach into the specific shape of the emptiness Clara had left, and settle there. She said yes. The claiming ceremony was held in front of the full Ironvale Pack on a clear evening in early winter. She wore a dress borrowed from one of Ragnar's packmates. The pack elders presided. Though every wolf in the territory howled, Isla stood at the center of it, Ragnar's hand on her wrist, and felt herself become part of something. She did not know, that night, that what she had felt was false, that the ritual had been manipulated, performed in a way that suppressed her wolf's ability to recognize what it was truly seeking. She did not know there was a term for what Ragnar had done, written into pack law in the oldest texts, carrying the harshest penalties available to the Alpha King's tribunal. She only knew she was no longer alone. She would not realize, until much later, that belonging and captivity can feel identical from the inside. The change was gradual. That was the particular cruelty of it. Not a door slamming shut. A temperature dropping. 1 degree at a time, slow enough that you keep thinking it is still warm enough, until one day you realize your breath is visible and you cannot feel your hands. Or 2 months in, Ragnar requested, pleasantly, that Isla's earnings from her healing work go into the shared pack account. Mates share everything, he said, with a smile that made it feel like generosity. She agreed. It seemed reasonable at the time. 4 months in, Mila arrived. Ragnar's mother moved into the pack house with the certainty of someone who had been told she was welcome and had interpreted this to mean she was needed. She was small, shorter than Isla, or in the pack house was to have Isla's herb in the pack house, was to have Isla's herb garden dismantled. An eyesore, she said, looking at it with the expression she reserved for things beneath her standards. We'll put in something more appropriate for a home of this standing. Nothing was put in. The garden was simply gone. Isla said nothing. She told herself it was a small thing. Then came the comments, delivered in front of others, which was always deliberate. The audience was part of the mechanism. She came from nothing, you know. No pack, no family. Ragnar's generosity is really quite remarkable when you consider it. Said pleasantly, said with a smile, shaped exactly like a statement of fact, landing exactly like a verdict. Isla tried at first to respond, gently, clearly, without aggression. To remind Mila, and those listening, that she had a history and a name and a grandmother whose healing knowledge was respected across 3 territories, that she had value that did not originate with Ragnar's invitation. Mila would tilt her head and say, "Of course, dear," in a tone that made everything Isla had just said feel small and defensive. Ragnar would say nothing. Stellan would look at his plate. When Isla discovered she was pregnant, she allowed herself, briefly, to hope. She sat with the knowledge for one quiet morning before telling Ragnar, holding it close in those few hours the way you hold something that has not yet had the chance to be broken. A child. New life. The possibility that this, all of this, could become something worth the weight it had already cost. She told him at dinner. Just the 2 of them. His face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise. Then something calculating. Then he looked at her and said, "What, are you sure it's mine?" The warmth she had been carrying quietly for 6 hours went out like a candle. She said, with complete steadiness, "I have given you no reason to question that." He looked at her for a long moment, and then picked up his fork and went on eating. And from that night, the temperature in the pack house dropped again. More quickly this time, he began finding reasons. That was how it worked. Reasons, always her fault. It always something she had done or failed to do or said or failed to say. She had spoken to a visiting pack elder without waiting for Ragnar's nod, an embarrassment. She had asked Myla, in front of guests, whether the herb cabinet in the kitchen might be reorganized, disrespectful. She had once refused to leave the room when Ragnar raised his voice at her, defiant. The first night in the cabin followed that refusal. One night became 2. 2 became a week. A week became her permanent address. By the time her belly was too large to ignore, by the time every wolf in the pack could see the child she was carrying, the cabin was simply understood. No one questioned it openly. The few who felt the wrongness of it had learned, as Stellan had learned, that silence was the only currency Ragnar accepted from people who wanted to keep their place. Isla stopped fighting the lock. She stopped imagining rescue. She folded her pain inward and pressed it down, and found the bedrock beneath it, the part of her that Clara had built, the part that bent rather than broke, the part that could find warmth in a wolf pup's body heat and meaning in a baby's movement, and a reason to keep going in the simple, ferocious fact of the life growing inside her. She held on to that. And she waited. She did not yet know what she was waiting for. That Caelan Richmond moved through Ironvale's pack house the way certain kinds of weather move, without noise, without urgency, but with the absolute knowledge that everything in the surrounding space was aware of it. Every wolf in the hall felt him before they looked at him. The rank came first, that distinct, unmistakable pressure of alpha authority, so concentrated it required no display. It simply was. Like gravity. Like the tide. Not aggressive, not threatening. Simply present, and entirely non-negotiable. Ragnar stood at the entrance performing confidence. He was good at performing confidence. Caelan had noted this in the 3 reports he had received about Ironvale Pack before tonight's visit. Well-maintained grounds, well-organized accounts, strong numbers in every measurable category. Pack on paper. The kind of pack that looked exactly right on an inspection form and made experienced reviewers look more carefully at what the numbers weren't measuring. Caelan accepted Ragnar's greeting without warmth or coldness, neither invited nor shut down. He moved into the hall and let his eyes do what they always did in a new space. Count, categorize, note absences. There were too many wolves in this hall for a quiet evening. Assembled, not gathered. Performance. There were no pups visible anywhere in a pack of this size. There were no she-wolves at the main table. He filed all of this. "Walk the grounds," he said to Orion quietly, as before Ragnar could launch into whatever speech he had been preparing. Ragnar launched into it anyway. Caelan listened with enough attention to not be rude, and enough distance to make clear he wasn't impressed, and he watched the room while Ragnar spoke. The wolves along the walls who tried not to watch him too obviously, the older pack members who held his gaze a beat too long, the way Myla Doolin's sharp eyes tracked every shift in his expression from her seat at the far end of the table. So then Orion returned. 3 words. The hall noise continued around him as Caelan turned from Ragnar and walked toward the back of the pack house without explanation or apology. Ragnar's voice stopped mid-sentence. The hall went quiet, the way a hall goes quiet when it realizes something significant has just happened, and it missed the moment it began. The padlock. Caelan stood in the courtyard and looked at the padlock on the cabin door for 4 seconds. Long enough to confirm what he was seeing, or not long enough to let the anger that rose in him at the sight of it affect his next decision. Orion removed it. The door swung open, the torchlight fell across her face, and Kaelin stopped breathing. It was not a dramatic moment from the outside. He simply stopped, mid-step, for the space of 1 second, and in that second, 8 years collapsed into a single point of recognition, so absolute it felt like something physical. Silver-grey eyes, frost over still water. He had spent 8 years carrying the memory of a face he had never fully seen, a voice he had heard from the edge of consciousness for 5 fever-blurred days, steady and sure as a compass needle, hands that had known exactly what to do with his wounds before he was awake enough to wonder who they belonged to. A girl who had saved his life, refused his gratitude, refused his ring, refused even to tell him her name, and then disappeared as completely as if the forest had simply absorbed her. He had employed 3 investigators over 8 years. He had followed the silver thread technique on the charm she'd left on his wrist, a distinctive, old-style wolf weaving that narrowed to a small number of practitioners in the Northern Territories. The trail had ended, twice, in dead ends. Then, 4 months ago, one of his people had found a reference to a she-wolf healer in Iron Vale border territory named Clara Finch, who had taught that same technique and who had a granddaughter. He had accelerated the Iron Vale review, and now he was kneeling on the floor of a rotting cabin with his knee in cold earth, looking into eyes that had been present in every quiet moment of 8 years, and those eyes were looking back at him with nothing in them but fear, and the exhausted readiness of someone who had been bracing for a long time. She did not recognize him. Of course she didn't. She had seen him in a storm, in near darkness, unconscious and barely alive. She had tended a body, not a face. She had no reason to connect the man kneeling in front of her with the dying stranger she had found at the base of an oak tree 8 years ago. He kept his voice steady. No one here came to harm you. He watched her eyes move across his face, searching, measuring, running the calculation of trust that a person runs when they have been given too many reasons not to trust. He waited for her to finish the calculation. He did not rush it. Then he asked her the question. He watched them move through her, the way she received those words. He watched them move through her, the way certain words move through a person who has not heard that particular combination in a very long time. The way water moves through cracked stone, finding every gap and settling into it. He watched her eyes change as she turned the question over, searching for the trap behind it. He kept his face open. Whatever she found when she looked at him, he wanted it to be readable. Nothing hidden. Nothing performed. She looked at Ragnar being held back at the packhouse door. She looked at the wolf pup pressed against her knee. She looked back at Kaelin, and something in her face shifted, fractionally, the smallest opening of a door that had been closed a long time. Her eyes moved across his face one more time, resting for just a moment on his right forearm, where the sleeve had shifted and the scar was visible. Her brow moved. She sees it, he thought. She doesn't know what she's seeing yet, but she sees it. She pressed her hands to her knees and stood. "I want to leave," she said. Her voice was steady, quiet. The voice of someone who is using every available resource to hold themselves upright, and succeeding. Kaelin stood with her. Ragnar's voice broke across the courtyard like a thrown object. "She belongs here, or she made vows. Pack law requires." Orion didn't move. He simply stood between Ragnar and the path Isla was walking, his presence as calm and immovable as a wall. Myla's voice followed Ragnar's from the packhouse doorway, sharp, clipped, aimed at Isla's retreating back. "You have nothing! You are nothing without this pack! Where will you go? Who will take you?" The words landed in the cold air and went unanswered. Isla walked, one step, then the next, her arm curved under her belly, her chin level, her feet finding each flagstone of the frozen courtyard, with the deliberate steadiness of a woman who has decided where she is going and doesn't require her body to stop shaking in order to get there. Ash clicked along at her left heel. The night opened before her. Behind her, Stellan stood in the pack-house doorway behind his mother, not speaking, not stopping her, both hands flat against the doorframe. His face was turned toward Isla's retreating figure, and there was something in his expression that the darkness and the distance mostly hid, but did not completely. The look of a man watching something he has failed to do for a long time, finally being done by someone else. Isla did not look back. She had learned, in 2 years, the particular freedom of not looking back, of taking the next step instead, of keeping your eyes on the direction you have chosen and to trusting your feet to carry you there. She walked all the way to the convoy vehicles, and then, for the first time in 8 months, she sat down somewhere warm. The travelling healer quarters smelled of pine resin and clean linen, and something herbal she couldn't immediately name, something that reminded her of Clara's workroom, of early mornings and careful hands, and the feeling of being in a space that was built for the purpose of making things better. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and let herself feel it. Warm. She was warm. The heat of it moved through her slowly, like something her body had not been sure it was still allowed to receive, and was cautiously accepting. Nora Haskins worked with the efficient quiet of a healer who had seen a great deal and had long since learned to let what she observed inform her hands rather than her face. She was in her 40s, grey-streaked hair, steady dark eyes, and she examined Isla with a thoroughness that was both clinical and deeply humane, noting everything, asking brief, clear questions, but never once softening her documentation of what she found, which was a great deal that should not have been there. She did not say, "This is terrible." She said, "I'm going to note this," and then noted it with the care of someone who understands that the truth of what is written down carries weight in rooms with stone tables. When she was done, she squeezed Isla's hand once, briefly, and left. Isla sat in the warmth, while Kalen pulled a chair to a position he had clearly chosen carefully, close enough to be heard when speaking quietly, far enough to not crowd the space of a woman who had been crowded enough. He sat, and he waited, and he did not speak first. Isla appreciated this. She was the one who finally broke the silence. "Who are you?" He told her his name, his full name, his rank. She looked at him for a long, still moment. The Alpha King of the Northern Packs. She had heard of him, or everyone had heard of him. The story of a kingship built from nothing, from a border outpost, from the loyalty of wolves who had known his father and transferred that debt to the son. She had heard he was hard. She had heard he was fair. She had heard that packs ran clean under his review, and messy ones did not stay messy long. She had never expected to meet him on the floor of a rotting cabin. "Why are you here?" she said. "Personally, or you didn't have to come yourself for a routine review." He reached into the collar of his shirt, drew out a leather cord, set the small silver wolf charm on the table between them. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Isla looked at the charm. She looked at it, the way you look at something you haven't seen in 8 years, but have thought about, in the specific, the compressed way of things you carry without quite knowing you're carrying them, present in the back of every quiet moment, small and certain as a heartbeat. "You were the man in the forest," she said. "Yes." His voice was steady and low, the way someone speaks when they have carried a thing for a long time and are finally setting it down carefully, rather than dropping it. He talked. He did not rush it. He told her all of it. The fever breaking on the 5th morning in the forest shelter, the charm still on his wrist when he regained full consciousness, the 8 years of carrying it and trying to find its origin. The investigators, the 2 dead ends, the silver thread technique, distinctive enough to narrow to a small number of practitioners in 3 territories, leading eventually to a name. Clara Finch. Then, a granddaughter. Then, Ironvale. "I found you," he said. "And when I did, I found you living behind a padlock." His jaw tightened on the last word. A small, more visible movement quickly controlled, the way a well-trained person controls an emotion they feel, but do not wish to perform. She watched him. She was quiet for a long time after he finished. Long enough that he might have thought she was not going to respond, but she had not gone silent from shock or from loss. She was thinking, carefully and completely, the way Clara had taught her to think. Following every thread, checking the shape of things before accepting them. "But you searched 8 years," she said, slowly, "for someone you didn't know the name of." "Yes. Because she helped you in a forest in the rain and asked for nothing. Because she saved my life," he said, with a directness that was not performance. "And because, yes, because she asked for nothing. I have been in rooms with many people who wanted something. She was the only one who simply did what needed doing and told me to live. I didn't know how to set that down." Isla looked at the charm, at person it belongs to. "My grandmother person it belongs to." "My grandmother knew," she said quietly. She always knew more than she explained. She was the one who said the next thing. And she said it while looking directly at him, because she had learned in 2 years what happened to words you said while looking at the floor. They were easier to ignore. "I'm grateful to you. Oh, truly, what you did tonight, what you gave me back tonight, I will not find a way to say what that means, so I won't try." A pause. "But I need you to understand something." He was listening, completely, the way someone listens who does not already know what they're going to say next, who is actually receiving what is being said rather than preparing their response. "For 2 years," she said, "every decision about my life was made by someone else, or I was fed or not fed based on someone else's mood. I was warm or cold based on someone else's judgment. I was in that cabin or in the pack house based on whether I had said the right thing or the wrong thing in the right or wrong way. 2 years of having no choice about any of it." She held his gaze. "I will not trade one kind of control for another kind of control, no matter how much kinder the second kind looks. I decide what happens next. I decide where I go, and I decide what I accept and what I don't." He looked at her. And here was what she had not expected. He did not look offended. He did not look like a man who had expected a different response and was adjusting to disappointment. He looked. She studied this, because she had learned to study faces carefully. He looked like something had quietly relaxed in him, as though some bracing he had been doing, some preparation for a response that did not come, had gently let go. "You decide," he said, "and I only make options available." She looked at him for a moment. "That," she said, "is a very careful way to put that." Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, close to one. "I've had 8 years to practice it," he said. Outside, Ragnar had recovered himself enough to invoke pack bond law. His voice carried across the dark courtyard, practiced, formal, with the specific precision of a man who had kept a lawyer's knowledge of pack rules stored for exactly this kind of moment. He cited the claiming ceremony. He cited the bond rights of a declared mate. He cited 3 separate precedents from the Northern Pack laws that he had clearly not memorized tonight. Cailan stepped out of the healing quarters. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Ragnar across the courtyard for one moment, a long moment, the kind of moment that works on the gathered wolves around it, the way cold air works on a fire, quieting things down. And then he spoke. "A tribunal will be convened in 3 days. All claims will be heard, all evidence examined. Until that time, she is under the protection of the Alpha King's authority." The courtyard did not move. Ragnar opened his mouth. Orion, from 3 steps away, turned to look at him. Just looked at him. Ragnar closed his mouth. Myla, behind him, said something low and fierce that reached no one outside their immediate vicinity. Stellan, in the doorway, looked at the ground. The gathered Ironvale wolves watched their Alpha King's face go through an adjustment, the shift of a man recalibrating under conditions he had not prepared for, finding the performance of control harder to maintain than usual. Cailan had already turned back toward the healing quarters. The thing about real authority, he had learned in years of building it from almost nothing, was that it required almost nothing from you in these moments. It was not performed. It was not enforced. Osdulin knew this now, in a way he had not been able to see it before. He did not need to raise his voice. Ragnar Dolin knew this now, in a way he had not fully understood before tonight. The night before the tribunal, Isla could not sleep. This was not unusual. Her body had not found sleep easy since the cabin, and the healing quarters, warm and clean and safe as they were still new, to still an environment her nervous system was cataloguing rather than resting in. She moved carefully out of the bed and walked the corridor, and found herself, without fully planning to, at the doorway of the main hall. Cailan was there, sitting alone at the long table, one candle lit, looking at the dark window. She sat beside him. Neither spoke for a long moment. The fire had burned down to coals, and the hall held the particular quiet of a large space, nearly empty of people, the kind of quiet that has space in it for whatever needs to be said. He spoke first eventually, quietly, without looking away from the window. He told her he had grown up without a pack, the son of a king who had died before the recognition could be formal, before the name could be passed cleanly. He had been raised in a border outpost by wolves who owed his father a debt of loyalty they were repaying to the son. Good people, honest people, but not family, not pack in the real sense. "I built everything from that point outward," he said. "Year by year, pack by pack, negotiation by negotiation. I understand men like Ragnar. I've removed several of them from positions they used for precisely the same purposes." He paused. "In my world, they don't get second chances." Isla looked at him. "But you'll give him one anyway." A pause. "Because you asked me to." She was quiet for a moment. She thought of what she had said to him yesterday. "I decide what happens next," and the way he had received it without flinching. She thought about the way he had kneeled in that cabin, the Alpha King of the Northern Packs, on one knee in cold dirt, making himself level with a woman who had forgotten she was allowed to take up space. "You could have walked in there," she said, slowly, "and taken everything he had in the first hour. Your authority, his crimes, the evidence. It would have been over before morning." "Yes," he said. "But a trial means I get to speak." He looked at her. "Yes," he said again. "It means you get to speak. In front of the pack, on record, in a proceeding that cannot be undone or revised." She looked at the coals for a moment. She thought of 2 years of being told she had no voice, of every word she had spoken being evaluated, managed, or punished or permitted based on whether it served someone else's convenience, of the particular violence of being made to feel that the things inside you, your knowledge, your experience, your pain, your truth, were not real enough to deserve to be heard. She reached over and rested her hand over his. His breath stilled. She could feel it, that slight, involuntary pause, the kind of pause that a body makes when something significant arrives unexpectedly. "That," she said softly. "What is the difference between power and strength?" He turned his hand over slowly, carefully, and held hers in the lightest possible way, present without pressing, there without claiming. She felt the warmth of it travel up her arm. They sat there in the quiet of the nearly empty hall and watched the coals for a long time. The tribunal hall was stone, old stone, the kind that had heard difficult things before and would hear them again, the kind that held no prejudice about what was true and had no interest in protecting what was false. Pack elders sat along the sides, 7 of them, stone-faced and attentive. Orion stood at Kaelin's right, straight-backed and silent. Ragnar stood at the central position, dressed well, composed, his arms at his sides, performing a man who had done nothing wrong because he did not believe he had done anything wrong. Kaelin placed the silver wolf charm in the center of the table. Set it there without explanation. Let it sit. Ragnar's eyes moved to it, and something shifted behind them, quickly controlled, but visible to anyone watching for it. He knew the charm. He had searched for it 2 years ago, quietly, when he had discovered Clara's connection to the claiming. He had torn apart the cottage looking for it. He had never found it. He had spent 2 years not knowing where it was or what it meant. Now it was on the tribunal table, placed there by the Alpha King. Ragnar's composure did not break, but it thinned. Nora Haskins testified first. She stood at the stand with the same steady, composed authority she brought to everything, and she read from her documentation. Dates, locations, measurements, the clinical vocabulary of a healer describing what she had found on a woman's body after 2 years in a cabin. She did not editorialize. She did not need to. The room's temperature dropped by the time she was done. Stellan Doolin was the 3rd name called. Now he appeared at the tribunal hall entrance, and the room shifted. Every head turned, every eye moved, because everyone present knew Ragnar's brother had never spoken against his brother publicly, had never spoken against anything publicly, had spent years as a warm presence that generated no friction and no heat. He walked to the stand. His hands gripped the edge of it. His face was the color of old plaster. He did not look at Ragnar. He looked at Isla, and then he opened his mouth, and 2 years of silence came out. He was precise. That was the part of it that stayed in the room long after he had finished. The precision of it, the detail, the specificity of a man who had been watching and storing and cataloguing every night he had stood in a doorway and done nothing, as if he had been building this testimony in the back of his mind all along. The night of the first snowstorm, when Ragnar sent Isla to the cabin in thin clothing, and Stellan had stood at the packhouse window and watched the light appear under the cabin door and turned away. The night she had knocked, having run out of firewood, and Ragnar had told the pack guard not to open it. The morning Stellan found her, collapsed against the outside of the cabin wall, and carried her inside and gave her his own coat, and then told no one because he was afraid of what his brother would do to him if he did. "I stayed silent because he is my brother," he said. His voice barely wavered. "Because my mother said it was not my place. Because I told myself it was not as bad as it looked. Because that was easier than accepting that I was watching it happen and doing nothing." He paused. "But silence has a cost, and I have been paying it every night for 2 years." Myla's voice from the gallery was immediate and sharp, a mother's defense, loud and rising. But the pack officers were at her sides before the second sentence was out of her mouth. She went fighting. The hall doors closed behind her. Stellan watched her go. The relief on his face was visible and honest, and he made no effort to hide it. Isla had not been required to appear. She chose to. She walked into the hall and took the central position and looked at Ragnar, directly, steadily, without the habitual downward movement of her gaze that 2 years had tried to build into her as a reflex, while she looked at him the way she had not been allowed to look at him in 24 months. He looked back at her, and for just a moment, only a moment, she saw it in his face. The awareness that this had shifted in a direction he could not reverse. She spoke. She did not shout. She did not cry. She did not perform her pain for the audience, or raise her voice, or reach for dramatic effect. She spoke quietly, clearly, one fact at a time, and in the voice of a woman who has learned that the truth does not require decoration to be devastating. Just clarity. Just space. Just the specific weight of things that actually happened, said aloud in a room full of people required to hear them. She told them about the herb garden, about the stipend, about the long progression of small cruelties that preceded the large ones, the way a tide retreats before a wave. She told them about the cabin, about the nights she had no firewood, and about the morning she had knocked on the pack-house door during a storm and been turned away. Ragnar interrupted when she reached the 2nd month of the cabin. "I did what I did out of concern for the pack," he said, his voice tight. "She was unstable. She was disruptive. I was protecting. You never loved me," Isla said. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The simplicity of it cut through the hall and landed in the silence. You needed someone with no one left to protect her. And those are not the same thing. The hall was so still you could hear the candles. Ragnar's jaw tightened. He looked at her with an expression that was trying to be contempt and landing closer to fear. He said nothing. The verdict. Ragnar Dulin, convicted on all charges, the forced claiming annulled, his rank as Alpha of Iron Vale Pack stripped, exile from the Northern Territories ordered, effective in 48 hours. He surged to his feet the moment the last word was spoken, and the pack officers were faster, hands on his arms, holding him still. His voice broke open. "You'll regret this." The words aimed at Isla like thrown objects. "You have nothing without me. You had nothing before me. You'll have nothing after. You'll see." Isla stood perfectly still. She looked at him one last time. She had spent a long time being afraid of him. She had spent a long time managing him, measuring him, predicting him, adjusting herself to avoid his reactions. I'd space of one breath. I had nothing with space of one breath. "I had nothing with you either," she said quietly. "At least now the nothing is mine." She turned away from him. She did not look back. And then, in the space of the next breath, the pain arrived. Sudden, fierce, unmistakable. Her hand went to her belly, a sharp intake of breath. Her knees began to go. Nora was at her side before she reached the floor, Orion's voice behind her, calm and fast. "Get the healer quarters ready." Kalen was on his feet. The baby was coming. They moved her quickly, Nora's hand on her back, her voice a steady low current beneath the urgency. "Breathe, Isla. Just breathe. One step. There we go," steering her through the stone corridor, into the warmth of the healer quarters, into the room that smelled of pine resin and clean linen, or the room that had been the first warm place she'd sat in months. The labor was fast and fierce, as though the baby had been waiting for exactly this moment, waiting with extraordinary patience for precisely the right conditions. The tribunal completed, the cage broken, the verdict delivered, her mother finally, definitively, free. Between contractions, Isla's mind went somewhere soft and far. She saw the cottage, Clara in her chair, the lamplight on silver thread. You planted a seed, or trust it to grow. She saw the forest shelter, rain on the roof, a stranger's dark eyes opening, disoriented and sharp, and finding her face. Who are you? Someone who found you, bleeding in the rain. She saw the cabin, cold floor, thin candlelight, Ash pressed against her knee. Her own voice in the dark. I promise I'll find a way to get you somewhere safe. She breathed. Grandma, she said, through gritted teeth and tears she had not planned. I'm going to be a mother. I wish you could see her. Nora's hand on her wrist. She can. Kaelin paced. Orion stood against the wall of the corridor and watched his Alpha King pace, and had the private experience, which he would never mention aloud, of watching the most formidable individual he had ever served behave like an ordinary, terrified person. Kaelin did not pace. He had never, in 7 years, paced. He stood. He moved with intention. He was still when he was thinking, and purposeful when he was moving. And he had never once, in 7 years of diplomatic crises, military confrontations, pack tribunals, border negotiations, and 2 separate assassination attempts, done what he was doing right now, which was wearing a narrow path in the stone floor of a corridor outside a closed door, his hands doing nothing useful, his eyes going to that door every 12 seconds. First time I've seen you like this, Orion said. Kaelin did not respond. His eyes went back to the door. He had survived worse things than this. He had held command under conditions that would have broken most wolves. He had built an authority from a border outpost and a handful of loyal wolves, and the stubborn conviction that good governance was possible if you were willing to put in the work. He had never found a single situation in 7 years of power that had made him feel genuinely helpless. He found this one. He could do nothing. He could only wait. And the door was right there, and behind it was a woman who had been through more than any person should be asked to carry, and he was standing in a corridor being useful to absolutely no one. He paced. The cry, when it came, was everything. Clear, indignant, strong. The sound of a person arriving in the world with strong opinions about it, announcing themselves without hesitation or apology. Kaelin stopped moving. Orion straightened against the wall. Nora's voice came through the door, level and warm. A girl, perfectly healthy. Kaelin exhaled. The exhale of a man releasing something he had been holding, without realizing how hard he had been holding it. Inside the room, Isla held her daughter against her chest. She was small. Impossibly, perfectly, fiercely small, with dark hair still damp and eyes that were not yet focused, but that moved with purpose, searching the face above them with the serious attention of someone who has just arrived somewhere important and is taking inventory. Isla felt her heart do something she had no prior experience of, not breaking, not aching, expanding, opening into something so much larger than the space it had previously occupied that she had to take a slow, complete breath just to hold it. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I kept my promise. You were born somewhere safe." She looked at her daughter's face, at the dark hair and the small, determined mouth, and the hands like, she had no better word for it, like flower petals. They small and furled and extraordinarily complete. She said the name she had been carrying since she first understood she was having a daughter. Clara. The knock at the door was soft. Isla looked up. "Come in." Kaelin stepped into the room slowly. Every bit of his body language had shifted. The authority present in the corridor, in the tribunal hall, in the courtyard had not disappeared, but it had rearranged itself into something different. Something uncertain, was in the specific way of a person who knows what to do in almost every situation, and has arrived in the one they don't have a map for. He looked at Isla holding the baby. He looked at the baby. The expression on his face was something she had not seen there before. Not the stillness of control, not the warmth of the previous night's quiet conversation, but something more fundamental than either. Something stripped back to the most basic layer. Awe, maybe. Less specifically the awe of someone who deals in systems and authority and structure and has just encountered something that operates entirely outside all of those categories. "Thank you," Isla said, softly. for giving my daughter the chance to be born free. He moved to the chair beside the bed. He sat, and he looked at Clara. Really looked. The way someone looks when they are trying to memorize, rather than simply observe. "She's so small," he said. It was so genuine, so entirely undefended, that Isla laughed. A real laugh. Not performed, not offered politely. A laugh that came from somewhere in the middle of her, warm and helpless and entirely unguarded. The laugh of a woman who had not felt genuinely delighted by anything in a very long time and was surprised by it. It was the most beautiful sound Calen had ever heard in his life. He looked at her, and he was smiling. Fully, without performing it. The real thing. "What will you call her?" he asked. "Clara," Isla said. "After my grandmother." He nodded. Something moved across his face, the kind of movement that happens when a name lands somewhere deep. "She carries a great name," he said. Before he left, he reached into his jacket. He set a small velvet pouch on the table beside the bed. Isla looked at it. She looked at him. "Open it," he said. She untied the cord and tipped the pouch, and the silver wolf charm slid into her palm. She stopped breathing. It was exactly as she remembered it from the shelter, from the morning she had left it on his wrist and walked home through the clearing forest. The silver thread, the small wolf's body, curled. One of Clara's, unmistakably. The weight of it familiar in her hand, the texture of the thread recognizable in the tips of her fingers, the thing she had carried in her mind for 8 years without knowing she was still carrying it. Back on its leather cord. Polished. Kept. "Well, you left it with me 8 years ago," he said. "It was always yours." Isla pressed the charm against her chest and closed her eyes. She felt something in her chest unbind, a knot she hadn't known the full shape of until it released. Clara's voice, so clear it could have been in the room. A seed planted in darkness grows toward its own light. She had planted it without knowing she was planting it. She had grown it without knowing she was growing it. And now it was here, in her palm, or returned by the hands it had found its way to. She opened her eyes. They were bright and full, and she let the tears fall without shame, because she had spent 2 years not crying in front of anyone, and she was done performing the strength of not feeling things. Calen looked at her the way he had looked at Clara, with that stripped-back, fundamental attention. "Your grandmother," he said quietly, "was remarkable." "Yes," Isla said. She was. 6 months later, and on the first real morning of autumn, cold, clear, the kind of morning where you could see all the way to the edge of the northern forest, and the trees were turning amber at their tips, Isla opened Clara's hearth. She had chosen the location herself, a long, low building at the edge of the northern pack lands, far enough from Iron Vale to be new, close enough to the old forest to feel like home. She had spent 4 months designing it. Not with grandeur, or not with anything that needed to be impressive, but with the specific thoughtfulness of a person who knows exactly what a she-wolf needs when she has been running for a long time and needs somewhere to stop. A large kitchen with a fireplace wide enough to stand in. A common room with low chairs and floor cushions, and a bookshelf that anyone could add to, and anyone could take from. Individual rooms that locked from the inside. A small herb garden along the south wall. Every plant chosen and planted by Isla herself, labelled in both Common and Old Wolf script, the way Clara had labelled everything. A front porch with 2 chairs and a view of the tree line. She called it Clara's Hearth. Word moved through the northern packs quietly, the way important things do. Not announced, not advertised, passed from one she-wolf to another in the specific language of people who know others who need to know. There's a place. She-wolves only. There are no questions about where you came from or what you left behind. Just a fire and a door that locks from the inside. The rooms were never empty. Cailan visited on a Thursday in early October. He came without ceremony. One vehicle instead of a convoy, no advance notice, a knock at the door in the late afternoon, the way any ordinary visitor might knock. Isla answered it herself, Clara balanced on her hip, Ash at her knee. He looked at them both. "I brought supplies," he said. And something for her." The something turned out to be a small carved wolf from the border settlement he had been through 2 weeks ago. A children's toy, bright painted, anatomically improbable, with a tail that wagged when you squeezed it. Clara seized it with both hands, with the focused enthusiasm of a child who recognizes a good thing immediately. Isla stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. He did not treat it as a visit from an Alpha King to a subordinate's facility, but he treated it as a visit, sitting on the floor of the common room, while Clara climbed on him with the absolute confidence of a 7-month-old who has not yet learned to be uncertain about anything, bringing supplies into the kitchen and putting them away in the correct places without being asked because he had been paying attention on the previous visit. He stayed for the afternoon. He did not ask for anything. He helped where he was useful, and was quiet where quiet was appropriate, and did not perform either the visit or the restraint, just was present, the way presence is its best when it requires nothing from the person it is offered to. That evening, as the sun went orange at the edge of the forest, and the first stars appeared above the tree line, Isla found him on the porch. He was sitting in one of the 2 chairs, looking at the sky, and he turned his head when she came through the door. The baby Clara was asleep inside, the deep, deliberate sleep of a child who has had a very satisfying afternoon of climbing on a large, obliging man. Isla sat beside him. The forest held its breath, the way the forest holds it sometimes at the turn of seasons, that brief, full pause between summer and autumn, between what has been and what is coming. After a while, without having planned to, she reached over and took his hand. He went still, but not surprised. She thought he had known this moment was coming, the same way she had known it, slowly and certainly, the way you know the season is turning before you see it in the trees. But present to it, not moving past it or through it, but sitting inside it, receiving it. He looked at her. She looked back. "You sure?" he said, very quietly. She thought about the 2 years in the cabin, the cold floor, the padlock, the promises she had whispered to a child who couldn't hear them yet. Or she thought about the night he had knelt in the dirt and asked her one question, the only question that had mattered, and waited for her to answer in her own time. She thought about choosing. She thought about what it had cost her, and what it had given her, and what it meant to choose something from strength rather than from need. "I've been sure for a while," she said. "I just needed to choose it for myself." He turned his hand over under hers, slowly, carefully. He held it the way he had held it the night before the tribunal. Present without pressing, there without claiming. She leaned back in her chair and looked at the first stars. He sat beside her and watched them appear, one by one, the way patient things emerge when the sky is finally ready to let them show. He had waited 8 years to find her. He could let her lead. In the weeks that followed, the northern packs told the story the way packs always tell stories, in pieces, or passed from wolf to wolf, gaining detail in one place and losing it in another, so that by the time it reached the outermost settlements, some versions had the cabin made of pure ice, and others had Ragnar exiled to an island in the middle of a frozen sea. The truth was both simpler and better. A pregnant woman had survived a padlocked cabin, and a tribunal, and a birth and a beginning, and she had done it without waiting for permission. An Alpha King had spent 8 years carrying a charm that didn't belong to him, and had eventually understood that carrying it home was the whole point. Clara's hearth grew. By the following spring, there were 2 new buildings added to the original, a proper healer's room with real equipment, and a separate teaching space where Isla ran twice-monthly sessions in the old she-wolf healing arts. Clara's methods and Clara's knowledge passed forward into hands that would use them well. Stellan, who had left Iron Vale the week of the exile and written to Ela once, carefully, asking whether she would accept his apology, became the Hearth's liaison to the Eastern Pax, a quiet, reliable presence who did not need recognition for the work and did not receive it, which suited him. He brought supplies once a month. He spent time with baby Clara, who regarded him with a solemn attentiveness that made him feel, every time, like he was being measured, and, just barely, but genuinely, found adequate. Mila Doolin did not seek contact, but a year after the tribunal, a letter arrived addressed to Ela in a handwriting she did not recognize. The letter was short. It said, in precise and difficult sentences, that the writer had made a choice once, a very long time ago, to pass on something that had been done to her, because she had believed, incorrectly, that this was the only way to bear it, that she did not expect forgiveness, that she did not think she deserved it, that she had heard about the hearth and thought she should say that what Isla had built was the opposite of what she herself had done, and that this mattered, and that she was aware of it. Isla read the letter twice. She did not respond. She set it in the small box where she kept Clara's unfinished charm, the letters from Kaelin, the growing collection of things that required more than one sitting to know what to do with. Some things took time. She understood this better than anyone. In the deep of the following winter, on an evening when the snow was thick enough to muffle the sound of the world and the healer quarters were warm and small, Clara was asleep in the next room, making the particular sounds of a sleeping baby that are the most peaceful sounds in the world. Kaelin sat beside Ursula at the fire and told her, quietly, that he had asked the council to formally recognize Clara's hearth as a protected sanctuary under Northern Pack law. This meant that no pack leader could claim authority over it. No Alpha could call its residents home without their consent. No one could lock a door from the outside. Isla looked at the fire for a long time. "You didn't tell me you were doing that," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd accept it," he said. "I decided to make it available. The choice was always yours." She looked at him, though he looked back, and there was the ghost of that almost smile, the one that had appeared in the forest shelter on the 4th night, the one she hadn't known was his until she had looked at him in the torchlight of the cabin doorway and felt something pull in her chest that she hadn't been able to name yet. She knew it now. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He was very still. Then, slowly, he brought his arm around her. Outside, the snow fell. The fire held, as baby Clara made a small sound in the next room and settled back into sleep. The charm hung at Isla's throat on its worn leather cord, returned after 8 years, and finally where it belonged. In the forest at the edge of the territory, the first wolves of the new generation ran in the snow, young and sure and entirely unafraid of the dark. Some debts never expire. Some wolves always find their way home, and the right kind of strength, the kind that bends and doesn't break, always, eventually, grows toward the light.